Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Desiree Cassell. I'm an orthopedic and pelvic floor physical therapist specializing in women's health, aka pelvic floor. I'm a wife, mom of 3, foodie, lover of all things movement and nature, and I'm super passionate about educating, empowering, and supporting other women like you to find and maintain balance throughout all aspects of their lives, without pain, pressure, or peeing their pants. And this is the Balanced Momtality Podcast, where we will talk about all things pelvic floor, your core, and optimizing your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, providing you with the knowledge and tools so that you can feel like the strong, playful, and happy mom that you and your family deserve. Now let's get you out of those pads and back to loving movement. Fill up your water, pop in those AirPods, roll out your mat, and let's connect. Before we start today's episode, just a quick disclaimer that anything mentioned in this podcast is not meant to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have any questions or concerns about your healthcare needs, please seek the care of your medical provider. This is also a safe space where we will be talking about very sensitive but important topics, such as issues with peeing and pooping, relationships, and even sex. So if you have littles around, probably a good idea to pop those AirPods in. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
All right, so I'm officially 35 years old, and I hope that you caught my birthday episode where I had some reflections and birthday lessons of what my body has really helped me to learn about strength and healing and just overall health and wellness. And I also mentioned a fun birthday sale that's going on this week only, where I am giving away a free spot inside of my 12-week on-demand restore program. This is only happening this week. It will be ending on Monday, March 23rd. Yes, Monday, March 23rd. Okay. So I am going to be announcing the winner, and all you have to do to be entered to win is leave a review for my podcast show. What that means is you just scroll to the bottom of my podcast page wherever you found my show. Give me a 5-star review, take a screenshot of that review and post it in your stories, or even just send me an email if you're not on socials. But this will enter you to win that free spot inside Restore. So don't forget to tag me at the Balanced Momtality on Instagram and Facebook. Tag me in your stories. Help me get my show out to others. Gift me that review and I will gift you a spot inside Restore. But that's not all, friends. This whole month I am running a birthday sale / oopsie sale for Restore because we had some tech issues. They are worked out now and I am still adding things to Restore. So we are back in the beta stage this month, and with that being said, and my birthday, I wanted to give you the opportunity to jump in at that beta sale price for $497. This is $500 off, where you get access to 12 weeks of lessons, 12 weeks of exercises, more exercises coming, by the way, and manual therapy tools, nervous system regulation tools, nutrition workbooks, and more. I can't wait for you guys to see the other exciting things I have coming inside Restore. So right now is the time to hop in and get access to all the juicy goodness coming at a super low price. So with that out of the way, I wanted to revisit some habits, practices, just things that I have found after working with so many women and even having done some of these things myself, that we do these things thinking that they are going to help us. So this isn't just our habits. I've done episodes on everyday habits that we're doing that are actually making our symptoms worse. And while those are somewhat correlative to some of the things we are thinking we're doing to help our pelvic floor, there might be some overlap here, but this episode is geared more towards what we might be actively seeking out or doing based on either what Dr. Google says on the internet or ChatGPT or your friend or your mom or even your pelvic floor therapist or your provider, right? And we do these things thinking we are doing something helpful. And it's so frustrating for me, for my patients, for the general population, I'm sure, to find that this thing we've been doing to help our body and get these symptoms that have been so frustrating, like leaking and prolapse and pain with intercourse and back pain and hip pain, to go away, it actually can cause a lot more problems and more harm than good. So this is here to break down some confusion. This might be an episode that might rustle your feathers in the wrong way, a little controversial maybe, but from my perspective, I have seen these things be something that you want to be careful of. And with that being said, please listen to the whole episode, because I might initially describe why it's harmful and then go into how it can be helpful. That way you know the tweaks that you need to make that thing that you thought was helpful actually do the good that you set out and intended for it to do, okay? So with that being said, I'm going to start off with, and these aren't really in any order, so don't be, putting too much weight on these as I say them. But with this first one, I think is just going to get the obvious out of the way, right? Because I'm sure if you are in my corner very much, listened to my show before, you know more around how I work, what I believe in, what those big philosophies are for me. And so kegels are something that I am not a fan of. And these are just a pelvic floor contraction, and this is where we want to make sure that we're not just engaging our pelvic floor, right? So I've said this time and time again, when we have pelvic floor dysfunction, it doesn't just mean we are weak. So especially if we have conditions like pain with intercourse, too many times, unfortunately, the referrals I'm getting from providers are dyspareunia or vulvodynia, pain with intercourse, strengthened pelvic floor, kegels, right? It's due to pelvic floor weakness. And I just cringe, because what if my patient didn't find me? What if they ended up just saying, hey, kegels, that's all I really need to do. Strengthening, I got that. I can look that up. And then they end up doing that. And that makes it worse, because a lot of these conditions with pain, back pain, hip pain, pelvic pain, pain with intercourse, if we just go into kegels, we can make more pain, right? There's tension behind that pain. But maybe you don't even have pain and you have tension. You don't really know if you don't have tension when you don't have pain. It's not as obvious, right? But when we have pain, we can pretty much guarantee there's some tension there. But if there's no pain, you still have to be careful, because there could still be tension, and doing kegels could cause pain or cause more dysfunction. So I'm not going to get all caught up on that whole tangent of kegels and how this can make symptoms worse, but you don't fix tension with more squeezing. We really need to fix the system by getting it to work together. So again, kegels are not always the answer. However, the flip side of this coin is that a kegel, therefore a pelvic floor contraction, does need to be a function of the pelvic floor. You need to be able to contract that pelvic floor. It just is a matter of, is it contracting with the system when it's supposed to? And just as importantly, is it relaxing and doing what you could call a reverse kegel and lengthening and stretching when it's supposed to? So we do need that function of a kegel, and there are times where I train that contraction piece of the pelvic floor lift during a heavy move, during an exercise, as we're engaging our brace, right? There's a time and a place for that engagement, but we need to know how much we're engaging, when are we engaging, how are we engaging, and knowing those boundaries of when we can't do that, and knowing when kegels and even that gentle lift is not what we want to pay attention to and put our energy towards, okay? And that also is just going to be a general blanket statement for Kegel weights, strengthening, right? In general, like if we are just getting into strength training, you could call it its own thing that you're doing, right? Maybe you're not focusing so much on Kegels, but maybe you are thinking, oh, I need to get stronger. I need to strengthen my pelvic floor. So I'm going to do squats. I'm going to do even some bridges. I'm going to do these exercises that are really helpful for strengthening. Don't get me wrong. We can get pelvic floor strengthening from bridges and marching and these other great core and full body exercises. That's how I like to strengthen the pelvic floor and core system. However, there's a time and a place for that strengthening. And if we're just jumping into strengthening without knowing where our tension is at in our system, how our system is working together, then again, just like with kegels, we could be creating more tension in the system and making things worse. And so we do want to make sure we're not adding vaginal weights. We're not focusing on kegels and strength training unless it is appropriate for you and you've gotten that guidance of how to do it, when to do it. That's not to say be super afraid of movement. By all means, try things out. If you're getting into exercise, definitely strength training is something I'm a huge fan of. However, we need to know if we are engaging our core correctly and how we're engaging our core throughout movement and exercise to know if these movements that we're trying are something that are going to be helpful for our body or not. So that also leads me into just strength training or doing exercise like running or high impact stuff, right? We're getting into exercise too quickly. We're getting into movement that may be too intense too soon, right? So we don't just want to start running. We don't just want to start lifting heavy weight. We don't just want to start kegeling or using vaginal weights. These can cause a lot of tension problems and increase other compensations and coordination issues, which is why inside of Restore, we really lay out that framework, not just jumping into engagement and tension, but really focusing on that balance of breath and coordination and making sure your tissues aren't tight, which is why I also am going to say that we need to be stretching. However, if we're just stretching, right? Like, oh, there's these pelvic floor exercises that I found online and they're these stretches, so I'm doing them. Great, but it actually could be causing other problems because maybe you're creating mobility where you already have a lot of mobility, right? Because if you're like me and you're hypermobile, if you're getting into stretches where we don't need it, right? Because a lot of times our body is holding tension because it needs that stability and support. And so if we go just into stretching and trying to do these movements that are creating more movement when we don't have the stability and strength in our system, then we also get the system backfiring and causing pain because it no longer has that stability. So it's a matter of when and getting this balance and comprehensive approach of doing both, and not just both stretching and both strengthening, but also release work, the breath work, the coordination work, the whole body connection. And this is what we do inside of Restore. So you want to make sure you're not just doing some stretching and going through, again, even great moves like cat-cow and child's pose and happy baby. And we're thinking, oh, this is all I need. It's not. It's just part of that process and part of that framework and part of the movement in your body, but it's not the only piece that your body needs, right? Your body also needs that strength and stability, but it also needs release work. So we can be doing release work wrong and making things worse as well. So if you are just digging in with a foam roller, or you are just digging in till it hurts and you're just like, oh, it's fine, and we're just being too aggressive with our release work, we are getting in with our foam rollers till we're cringing and tightening. We're digging in with the wand and using dilators maybe way too aggressively, right? Thinking it's fine, I can tolerate this. It's just, this is helping my body, so it's fine. It's not. If it's causing pain to the point where you can't relax, you can't feel your nervous system calm down and settle in that tension and discomfort, it is too much and you will make it worse. Especially things like dilators and internal work. When we're in these sensitive areas and trying to help rewire the system to find these spaces pleasurable and safe to be able to relax that tension, we're going to do such a disservice by being too aggressive with our wand work or our release work. On the flip side of this, we could be not necessarily causing problems by being too gentle, but it's ineffective. ineffective if we're too gentle with our release work. So if you are using a wand or a dilator and you don't really feel it at all, that's not to say you might not be getting some circulatory benefit, but if there's tension and we're not finding that tension, right? There's trigger points. We're not finding those trigger points. We're not bringing that vaginal opening to the point where it feels the stretch when we're trying to get dilators in and progressing, then we're not going to be really getting that big bang for our buck. And you're not really going to harm things, but in a way you are, because you're keeping those restrictions in your body, those fascial restrictions and scar tissue, especially with like C-section scars or episiotomies or tearing or any scars from a laparoscopic or abdominal procedure, or any procedure for that matter. Any scarring at all needs to be worked on. And it does kind of push the line of intensity and force to feel that mobility and get things moving again. But we have to be able to calm ourselves into it for our body to accept that without creating other sensitivity and pain and inflammation. But we also have to push that boundary a little bit within that safe space, or you're not going to get much out of it if you're just barely touching it and you're not feeling it, right? Now, if it's super sensitive, then barely touching and brushing gentle textures can be very beneficial. But if your tissue and sensation is feeling normal, brushing isn't going to do very much. And just gently massaging the surface isn't going to do very much. You need to get in deeper to really get the benefit of that scar and fascial mobility. And using the wand, if we're not feeling much, give a little more pressure. Your body will tell you before it is too much, and then you can back off, okay? We're not ignoring that pain line, but we're also not totally avoiding it and pretending like we have no pain. We need to find that space of discomfort that we can feel safe in, okay? With that being said, this one's going to sound a little silly coming out of my mouth, but breath work. Breath work could be something that you're doing that could actually be making things worse. And this sounds silly because I preach breath work all the time, and I do think everyone should be doing that. So I want to clarify that you could just be doing breath work wrong, right? Because if we're doing it right, we're not going to hurt our body. We're not going to cause issues, but there are ways we can do it wrong that can cause issues. So similar to the strengthening and the release work and all these things that I've said could cause issues, these are all things I actually love, but we can do them in ways that are harmful for our body. And so with that being said, breath work, if we are just shallow breathing, but thinking we're doing breath work because we're simply breathing, then we are really missing the big picture there, right? Because I do have patients that are like, yeah, I do breath work. And I'm like, okay, show me. And they're just breathing, right? They're just maybe taking a big breath, but it's all in their chest. They're not aware of even getting it into their belly. They're not even aware if their diaphragm's working. But I'm going to add on to the fact that belly breathing can be what's causing your issues, because belly breathing, while it does get the diaphragm engaged and helps with nervous system regulation, which is super crucial, we more need to think when it comes to pelvic floor and core control and stability, that this whole core canister is expanding and contracting together to manage pressure. And so if we have just the belly expanding, that's where we can run into problems, where your back and pelvic floor and sides are still staying tight and restricted, and your belly is getting that expansion when really your belly is already easily expandable and should be maybe working more on stability and contraction and engagement and trying to get the breath into the back and the pelvic floor where things are tight. And so we really want to be intentional with our breath. Where is it going? Slow it down. Relax the pelvic floor. The other mistake we make with our breath is we tighten on the exhale too often. You know, if we're bracing and it's a moment of effort, by all means, please feel that lift and give a pelvic floor contraction on your exhale during that moment of effort. But if you're just relaxed and sitting there, you're going to get more out of that breath by just inhaling and expanding and relaxing everything, and just let the exhale reflexively pull your body back up. Do not tighten. Most of us are already holding so much tension in our body and stress and when we are engaging the pelvic floor, it's just re-encouraging the brain and the nervous system that that is where it should live. And it's not. So we really want to think about that expansion and getting it into tightness and calming the nervous system down. And so breathwork is something we can do wrong. If your shoulders are lifting with your breath, if your rib cage is flaring up and out and your back's arching when you take an inhale, that's not the big breath we're looking for. Again, that rib cage might expand, but it should expand equally in the front, the back, and the sides. We don't just want to see that flare of your chest, because that means the back of your diaphragm isn't really working like we want it to, and that we should actually try and get it to the back, because it's also going to keep your abdominals in a stretch. It could encourage diastasis, and again, just issues we don't want. So even though you might be doing breath work, really assess, how are you doing breath work? And if this is something you want more help with, again, this is the work we do inside Restore. So definitely enter to win this week and join me with the sale this month. But I also have coaching one-on-one as always, so we can really get into your body patterns, where your breath is going, where it's not going, because breath work can be so crucial and so helpful when we're doing it correctly. But another habit or practice that we might be doing trying to help our pelvic floor symptoms that is actually hurting our body and making our issues worse is limiting our water intake. And this is a big one, because especially if we have urinary urgency or frequency where we all of a sudden feel like we have to pee, we can barely make it to the bathroom, maybe we're even leaking on the way, or maybe you're just going all the time and you feel like you're living around a bathroom. If we are getting to where we are decreasing our water intake because we feel like we already are peeing a lot, this just makes everything worse, unfortunately. And the reason being is because you're not peeing so often because your bladder's truly full. Majority of the time, we get into this habit, this pattern, this struggle of behavior in our body where we feel like we have to pee a lot, but we probably could actually hold it longer than we think. And there are maybe some conditions where we have irritated bowel bladder tissue that really doesn't like to stretch, but this is why limiting your water intake can only make those issues worse, because water is hydration. Water is life. Water lubricates our tissues. Water creates stretch and elasticity in our muscles, which our bladder is. And so if we aren't drinking enough water, we are creating dehydration and stiffness in our tissues. Then your bladder can't even stretch very well. And it's also going to have a higher concentration of urine. The water, or lack thereof, is going to make that urine inside the bladder more concentrated, and the bladder's not going to want it in there. So you're going to have more urgency because that urine's more concentrated. Whereas if you have a higher water concentration in your urine, the bladder can hold it a lot longer. It's like, oh, it's just water, no big deal. Versus if we have a lot of caffeine or citrus or acidic things in that urine, the bladder's going to want it out. So actually limiting our water intake or fluid intake in general, but especially water, is not the way to go. We need that flexibility and stretch capacity and strength capacity that water actually gives us. And water helps so many things. So just please do not limit your water. Another thing that can be making things worse that you might be doing is lubrication. So lubrication can be amazing and be a game changer, especially for friction and pain with intercourse, and using wands so we don't create friction and creating more slip and glide. Who doesn't love a little more slip and glide? But if we're using lubrication that our tissues don't like, it can create more sensitivity, more irritation, and sometimes even a breakdown of that vaginal wall and a lot more pain, which is not what we want, and that's really unfortunate. So we want to make sure we're trying different lubrications if things don't feel great, because it's not always a one size fits all, but there's definitely some things you want to be careful of. And so we do want to make sure that it doesn't have any parabens, Even with, we want no sugar content. So especially be careful with like KY jellies or some of these other lubricants that are more for like sexual fun, where they might put scents or flavors. Those kinds of things really impact vaginal pH and can cause more yeast growth and things like that we really don't want in the vaginal area. So it's really a much better idea to go for a water-based or a silicone-based, or even just using coconut oil, or just playing around with different ones to see which one your body prefers. But using lubrication is a great idea, and we just want to make sure it's one that's helpful for your tissues and not going to cause more tissue damage. With that being said, the other thing we could be doing is over cleaning the vagina. So if we are using things like douches, or if we are just using chemical fragrance, body washes, loofahs, right? Like there's Vagisil creates, there's all these different kinds of cleaners for the vaginal space. But let me tell you, friends, the vagina is self-cleansing. It's self-cleaning, meaning yes, we want to get in the cracks of the vulva, we want to get in the cracks of the groin, but we're not shoving abrasive and harsh soaps up there in the vagina. We're not going deep into the urethra and trying to scrub that space, because it naturally cleans itself. And it's just like the gut. We want good bacteria in there. And if we're using harsh surfactants, harsh soaps, harsh cleansing things internally like douching, can really create an imbalance in that vaginal pH and in the microbiome going on internally, and cause a host of problems. So definitely make sure you're cleaning, but warm water, a little calm soap externally is totally fine. Otherwise, internally, we're not sticking anything up there, and we're definitely not going for any weird chemical or fragrance smelling, good smelling things, because these kinds of powders to create like a perfume for our vagina can create the opposite effect, when it's actually going to change that pH and biome and create a more unnatural smell and odor. So with that being said, just let it clean itself, and a little water goes a long way. The other thing I wanted to just touch on here is that we are ignoring our symptoms, thinking that that's helpful, right? Like, oh, I just heard if I ignore this, it'll go away. I don't want to pay too much attention to it and let it run my life. But the other reality there is, yeah, maybe we ignore the urge a little bit because, yes, just in case going too often is another habit that is not right, that we can be doing thinking it's helpful, right? Oh, I have to pee, and I know I'm going to have to pee later, so let's just go to the bathroom really quick because then I won't leak. But that unfortunately rewires the brain and limits the bladder's ability to stretch and causes issues with the brain bladder reflex, giving you an urge to go. So going just in case is a big habit I've talked about on the show before that we do want to take out, because it is actually not helpful. It might keep you from feeling like you have to pee all the time, but the reality is you are peeing all the time regardless. And so we want to rewire that so that you don't feel the urge and you don't have to pee all the time. So this can cause some people to actually, ignore it, which is good initially to help stretch things out, but we don't want to ignore all of our symptoms. It is good to stretch things out, but we don't want to ignore the sensation of going to the bathroom to the extent that it causes us to leak. We also don't want to ignore bowel urgency or bowel sensation of having to have a bowel movement, because if we ignore that, even if it's not the right opportune time, then we can create constipation and other issues. But we also don't want to ignore pain and push through sensitivity when our body and our brain are saying, hey, this is too uncomfortable. And again, that's going to cause trauma if we're ignoring that boundary our body is giving us. So it's this fine give and take, as you'll see with everything I mentioned today, right? It's like all of these things can be good, but when done in the right way, with the right support, with the right materials and the right guidance, right? Because if we're just taking this generic advice, Kegel, strength train, do breath work, use lubricants, right? Don't go to the bathroom all the time, like clean, right? These things, while having great meaning, can actually cause other issues. So I just wanted to bring that to your forefront so that you could be aware and make sure you really are getting the big bang for your buck when you're taking that effort and trying to do these things to help your body. So I hope you found this episode helpful. And again, just know this is the work we do inside Restore. You get access to me, so it provides that channel for you to get coaching from me, and I do give you one-on-one advice. Now, we don't get one-on-one sessions together like the one-on-one coaching is, but you message me, you can send me pictures, you can send me videos where I can assess your form, look at your posture, see what your imbalances are, get a sense of your story, and really help to give you the guidance that you need to be able to see the success that you're so eagerly looking for. So don't wait, friends. Make sure you're leaving me that podcast review. Thank you so much for listening. Post it in your stories and tag me at The Balanced Momtality so that you can be entered to win this week. I will announce the winner on my socials on Monday. So don't wait, and also know that through March, even if you don't win, you can save $500 and jump in to Restore now. So can't wait to see you in there. Can't wait to see you next week on the Pelvic Floor Core and More show. Otherwise, you guys have a great weekend and we'll chat soon.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you've got so many other important things going on, but I hope it was helpful and you leave here with some tools to help you in your healing journey. And I just want to ask you, if you have found this helpful, to please leave a review on iTunes. Scroll down to the bottom of my podcast page and leave that 5-star review so it can help other women see this information. And also, if you want to be a part of my community of amazing women trying to balance all the things, great tips and insight and sharing stories and just motivating each other along the way, feel free to join my Facebook group, The Balanced Momtality, Wellness and Support. I hope to see you here next time on the Balanced Momtality podcast.